So, Tim, when did you realize that we need a biography on Charles Barkley, and how long did it take you to put this entire thing together?
Oh, guys, I think honestly, for anyone who has watched him every week on TNT and just understanding what he has brought on and off the court, just kind of understanding that he's approaching his 60th birthday now, it got me thinking how we've had this man in our life as a public figure for his last 40 plus years, but we really don't know how Charles Wade Barkley became Sir Charles, became Charles, became his presence in our life each week. So for me, guys, it was all about just kind of going back to the spring of 2019 and understanding that I had just this long road ahead of me. And all these years later now, post 400 interviews, I was able to put together something that uh, is by far the most comprehensive biography on Charles Barkley so far out there. And it really just kind of interviews everyone and hits on every big part of his life because he's led such a big American life, and it just felt like the right time for it.
Charles is bigger than life most of the time, bold and brash. That's the way Charles is. The first time I ever saw him play, 1982, a friend of mine, Sonny Smith, who was the head coach at Auburn at the time, brings in the Auburn Tigers to play Phi Slamma Jamma. And he said before the game, Matt, you are not going to believe this Barkley kid. He's going to give Akeem grief. And he did. It was a heck of a game. And that relationship built through the years. He was so bold and so brash during that one Phoenix Rocket series. He was getting his head shaved. He invited the media in, and he says, "We're in the butt kicking business, and business is good." But then, of course, the Rockets come back and win that series, and then the Rockets trade for Charles. I thought that was a great team. I thought they were going to win it all that first year when Charles came to Houston in '96.
Yeah, they had a real shot, and just kind of going back to the 1982 story for a second. When Auburn actually came into town, there was at least one cab driver who asked Sonny Smith and the other Auburn players, you, "You've got that fat kid, right? Who actually jumps up high," and they're like, "Who, Charles?" Yeah, and in that first game, with Olajuwon actually blocked his shot going down the court, and just coming back down, Charles actually dunked on Akeem back. That everyone's like, "Oh my God, we've never seen that before." So even back then, he left a real mark on Houston. And yeah, as you had mentioned, those series with Phoenix were so pivotal in those two championship years, and he really did kind of embrace the Rockets as that main rival when Michael Jordan stepped away because he had a three-tier stretch there where he had to go through Michael Jordan and then Hakeem within back-to-back years where he lost to the NBA champions in three straight seasons. So if you can't beat them, you just got to join them. And unfortunately for him and the others, he just got there at a really different part of his career, a part where he was not the same guy offensively. He could still rebound, he could still be a presence, but that first year was definitely his best shot, had all of the stars aligned there, and he he got them to the Western Conference Finals. He got them by that really tough Seattle team with Sean Kemp. They never had to answer for Sean Kemp until they got Charles Barkley, and that was a magical year. That just had them come up short, unfortunately.
You told us earlier that Charles was not a part of this book in terms of doing interviews with you and research. How did that impact the final product, and how did it shape your journey in completing this book?
Well, I really did want Charles to actually be a part of this process because, as someone who has been a part of another process in working on a biography on Tiger Woods with a couple other authors, I saw how awesome that book was, even though Tiger was not a part of it. And I told Charles and his people up front, this is going to be a great book. It's going to be even better with you in it. Ultimately, he said no, and then I interviewed almost 400 people for it. So I want to be as comprehensive and just leave no doubt as to that this is the book on Chuck at this moment. And it was an incredible journey. It had me speaking with everyone from his first coaches and his first girlfriend in Leeds, Alabama, to Vice President Dan Quayle, to Adam Sandler, to Shaq and Dr. J, just a wide range of people. And it really was so eye-opening how many lives he has touched from all these different backgrounds, guys.
Yeah, and he was generous with charitable causes. I mean, Charles was such a great guy. He was so great on the court at his peak, but I tell you, some of the off the court stuff, I'd like to hear one item from just one quick story, because I remember I had him standing by for a live shot during one of the playoff runs, and he's like, "Come on, man, I got to be getting my swerve on." He wanted to go. He wanted to go party that night, but he hung out. He did what was requested of him. But is there a quick anecdote you could give us? One of the best stories you've heard?
One of the best stories by far was in his time in Philadelphia when he had a road game in Milwaukee, and he went out afterward with a couple of these Bucks players to a bar, and as he was going out, he was with a friend of his, and he was actually followed out by this group of bodybuilders. And one of these bodybuilders in particular just was in a terrible mood that night and just wanted to get into a fight, to a point that it was 10 degrees in Milwaukee that night, and he just yells to Charles, "Hey, Charles, I hear you're the baddest dude in the NBA. Show it to me right now." And Charles, seeing these three huge bodybuilders, kind of understands that he was going to get his butt kicked if he didn't do something right then and there. So he decided, I'm going to be as crazy as possible in this moment. So he takes off all of his clothes. He cuts down to his boxers and his socks and starts doing this Karate Kid kind of move. And one of these bodybuilders I interviewed for this book said, I was sober that night. I didn't have anything. I see Charles Barkley, and I'm like, he's going to kick our butts right now. And he actually ended up slugging his main bodybuilder in his nose and actually breaking his nose, and then just talking crap to him afterward. And he was actually arrested that night, and the same day that he had his charges dropped was also the same day he got traded to the Phoenix Suns. So there were so many of these crazy stories, but that one still stands out to me for sure.
I thought it was interesting that when you spoke to Shaquille O'Neal about the Inside the NBA show, Shaq said that Charles is the catalyst for all we do. Usually it's your main anchor, your Ernie Johnson, who really sets the tone in situations like that. Were you surprised how Shaquille basically said it's for lack of a better phrase, Chuck's show, Chuck's karma that gets this thing where it is?
I was not, to be honest with you, because if you remember what Inside the NBA was before Charles get there, it was really just like every other studio show. It was mainly like the NBA on NBC at that point in time, which was very standard, very mechanical. It was not personal, but it was still the show back then. And when Charles got to TNT, he just kind of he forever altered what it meant to actually be on one of those studio shows. He wanted to have fun. He wanted to actually joke around. He wanted to talk about things not related to basketball, whether it be other sports like baseball or politics or especially food. So, you know, seeing what he has been able to actually build there with Ernie, Kenneth, and Shaq, it's no shock that they consider him the centerpiece and the catalyst for everything. Because without Charles Barkley, it would just be like every other show right now. And I think other shows have tried to imitate that, but there's one problem. There's only one Charles Barkley, and that show's been so special for so long for so many people. And I do think that without him, it would be just a lot more boring, to be honest with you.
Charles, the Houston Rocket, how is he different than Charles' other NBA stops in his career?
I think you had someone who was just a different player, someone who was older, someone who was coming in to grips with not being the man, because he was definitely the man in Philly and Phoenix. And here in Houston, he had to take a backseat definitely to Hakeem, and sometimes he was the third guy behind either Drexler or Scottie Pippen for that one season. So it was definitely an adjustment that he had a really hard time with. And I do think that if he had come to the Rockets much earlier on, they would have won a title. If he got the Charles who was in Philly or Phoenix, especially that Phoenix Charles who was kicking our butts, but he still beat it in the end. I do think that they would have gotten at least another championship out of it, but it was just all about timing. He was older, and he just couldn't do much else.
Yeah, he handpicked Houston. I remember there were rumors he was going to be traded, that type of thing. So I got a photographer, and Dream Team 3, I guess it was, 96, we just hopped on board and we traveled with Dream Team around the country, bugging Charles at every stop because he wanted to play with Akeem so badly. And it was unfortunate. It didn't work out here, but man, what a ride it was having Charles part of the Houston sports scene for that time.
It was really incredible. And as someone who grew up in Kingwood and went to a ton of those games, it was really cool for someone like me who went from just booing Charles Barkley, especially being his biggest fan at that point in time, because it's true, when you've got someone like Chuck, you just gravitate toward him because he's your dude. He says anything, and he just pushed boundaries that I hadn't seen before. So it really was a cool time. It's often in overshadowed time compared to his tenure in Philly and Phoenix, but it's still a really cool one, and one of those what ifs if he had gotten here a couple years earlier. But still, it was cool to see him in that jersey, though.
He is Timothy Bella. The book is Barkley, a biography. It's getting great reviews. Timothy, thanks so much for being on Sports Extra.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it a lot.